Welcome, this is Breathe California TV. Today our guest is Gerald Cummings of the cleverly named law firm, the Gerald Cummings Law Firm. That was the same thing I named my law firm. Spent hundreds of thousands on an image consultant. We ended up calling it the Law Offices of Terry Trumbull. But you know where to find him. So we're going to talk about your future. This is really vital to your future and the future of your kids or anybody that you care about. So come back and join us in 30 seconds.
The nice thing about Better Breathers Club is we go in and there's other people sitting around with oxygen. It's almost a relief that everybody looks the same in the room. It's a funny thing to say, but it's a good feeling. Breathe California means having resources available to us that will help guide us and make our lives easier.
Welcome back. This is Breathe California TV. I'm Terry Trumbull. I'm the Environmental Health Committee Chair. Each week we talk about topics to help protect your lungs, preventing smoking and air pollution. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about how you can protect the future of yourself and your family members with Gerald Cummings of the same named law firm. Where do you guys hide out?
I'm located at 1210 Park Avenue in San Jose, so very close to here.
Yeah, and in fact, Breathe California is 4 blocks away. We're in Willow Glen at 1469, so 1269. So
yep, just down the street.
Yeah, so it's really pretty close. So I've been promising you're going to tell us all how to protect the future of our loved ones, and to some degree, each of us. I mean, if my wife predeceases me, I would certainly like to have things locked up there to protect my future. So,
well, that's what I'm going to try to do.
So, in plain and simple terms, what are we talking about here? You like to refer to your estate and gift planning practice. What actually is that in lay terms?
What I like to think of myself as doing is helping families find peace of mind. I sit down with them, I see what their family situation is, and I put documents in place that will make sure that their wishes are going to be carried out both upon their death and if something happens to them where they're unable to make their own decisions because they've had a stroke or they've been in a car accident or something similar to that.
Yeah, and people don't think about that when they're younger, but that's just more and more common. We're living longer and we're having longer periods we may not be able to take care of ourselves.
That's very true, and actually I've had clients who had children in their 30s that have had strokes. So I've actually had clients both on the older end of the spectrum and then on the much younger end, and so it really does bring home the point that this planning is something that everybody needs to do.
Well, and I've just got to get in my quick aside here on behalf of Breathe California, which is smoking's the biggest cause of the kind of lung problems you're talking about. If you want to avoid those problems, quit smoking.
Or never start in the first place.
Yeah, and I can't overemphasize how important it is to everybody that you're fond of in your life, because secondhand smoke is killing 50,000 people a year. But we divert. So I haven't written a will, let's just say that. What in the world's the matter with that?
Well, there's nothing the matter with it as long as you like the state of California determining where all your stuff is going to go when you pass away. What people do when they do estate planning is, again, set up their wishes for what happens with their stuff when they die. So you do that with a will or with a trust. But they also, again, make decisions as far as who's going to make decisions, financial and medical decisions for them if they can't do it themselves. And so for many people, even if they have, not much at all as far as money, they still need at the very least a financial power of attorney, which is again what gives someone else the ability to make financial decisions for them, and a healthcare directive, which gives someone the ability to make healthcare decisions for them in the event they're unable to do so.
Well, all of this is starting to sound pretty complicated. Are, you know, someone of modest means, are they able to afford this type of help?
Yes, you know, I try to have my fees be priced so that, you know, the typical middle class person can afford them. You know, worst case scenario, you can get some of these documents online. You know, I don't necessarily recommend that. I've seen people make a lot of mistakes by doing it themselves, but at the very least you need to get something in place. It's very important.
Yeah, well, we're having a major estate lawsuit now in this county involving a very rich person that just reinforces your point. We're having handwriting experts say the guy was obviously drunk or insane when he hand wrote a will, and I suspect it's just going to waste a lot of money on litigation. So your services really help resolve these kind of things. So let's pick and choose a different category. If you own a home, I would assume you would think that'd be vital to come see you.
Yes, you know, often people say, well, I just need a will. You know, I don't have a lot, I just have a home. And I, you know, explain to them that in California, if you have a will, but if you own any real property, your estate will go through what's called probate. Probate is a court procedure where the court supervises the appointment of someone to manage your estate when you've died. They supervise the payment of your bills, and they supervise the ultimate distribution to whomever you want it to go to. Probate's very expensive. Probate fees on a $500,000 house are going to be about $14,000. And so the will is not necessarily the best option for someone who owns any real property. In those cases, people really should do what's called a living trust.
Well, let's expand on this, and because he lives in Sacramento, I can probably get away with this. My brother-in-law owns a home in Sacramento, but he hasn't bothered with any of the wills or estate planning. His theory is that he owes more in the mortgage than the house is worth, so he'll just let it go. When he dies, they can just foreclose on it. Somehow that sounds like what you just told us is a really dumb strategy.
You know, it is not the most intelligent strategy in the world. I wouldn't say it's dumb, but I would say it's not very smart, that's for sure. In a situation like that, you know, it's not just the home that's involved. I mean, there's personal effects. You know, I don't know if you said it was your brother, if he has a wife or children or not. Those would be involved. And if he does nothing, what would happen is, in all likelihood, that the mortgage company would file the probate petition to be kind of in charge of distributing all of his stuff. I mean, they're going to take the house, but he still has furniture and a TV set, and stereo, I assume, and clothing, and those types of things. And those would all be, you know, at the whim of the creditor. And frankly, in a situation like that, doing a will, you know, normally you'd want to do a living trust, but doing a will may be the only way that you could actually potentially get some money to your heirs, because the executor, the person that kind of runs everything, is entitled to a fee, and that's kind of the #1 priority. So if there was any money in the estate, that may be the only way, you know, that his wife or kids get something out of it, is if he were to do some type of planning.
So, I don't know, 30 years ago, California eliminated its estate tax, but you seem to be saying that was only part of the issue in doing all this planning.
Yeah, the main reason for planning for death is to avoid probate. Again, as I said, probate fees are fairly expensive. Probate also takes typically a year to a year and a half from the beginning to the end. It's a public record, so anybody can go and take a look at the file at the court and see, you know, what you owned when you died, who's supposed to get it, where they live, and, you know, can contact them. You know, so you do mostly this kind of planning for purposes of probate avoidance, but you can also do it for estate tax avoidance. If you have a large enough estate, there is a federal estate tax that you can avoid through proper planning. One of the ways that you can do that is through certain types of charitable planning.
Well, you really set me up on that. We're doing a Breathe California TV show, and obviously Breathe California is a charity that works very hard to try to come up with programs where people can give to Breathe California, but also get value out of an asset. So you want to talk about ways you can do that?
Sure. I mean, there's a number of ways that you can make charitable gifts. I mean, obviously, you can do the gift during your lifetime and take the appropriate tax deduction. You can name Breathe California in your will or your trust and just give them an outright gift upon death. That will result again in some type of tax deduction as well. What some people do is they set up certain types of trusts called charitable remainder trusts, and it's a pretty complicated area, but basically the way it works is you create a trust, you transfer in some asset into that trust. Often it would be maybe a rental property or something that maybe is not generating a lot of cash flow for you. You are in control of this trust. You sell that property, reinvest it, and depending on your age and what type of charitable trust you've set up, you're entitled to be paid a certain amount of money per year for either your lifetime or for a period of years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever you've chosen at the beginning. And at the end of the trust, either again upon your death or after the time is expired, whatever's left would go to Breathe California. The advantages of this kind of planning for someone is it allows them to sell an appreciated asset and defer capital gains and other taxes over their lifetime or the duration of the trust. It often will increase the income they were getting from that asset because they're able to pay themselves more than they were getting if it was a rental property, for example. And they get a tax deduction for the value that Breathe will end up with, which you calculate ahead of time. And you've done something good for Breathe California because you've now given them some money that they'll receive, at some point in the future. There's another way to do it where Breathe California gets the use of the asset for a period of time, and then upon your death or the termination of the trust, whatever's left goes to your kids or whomever else you want it to go. That's not as common as the other type of trust.
But in both of those situations, the owner of the property can both do better and Breathe California gets a benefit out of it.
That's correct.
So compare that on TV. Probably a lot of our audience, certainly I have, seen ads for reverse mortgage. Companies promise you that you turn over title to their house and they'll give you $50,000 a year for as long as you live. I assume the concept is similar, but there must be some benefit to doing it with a charity rather than on your own.
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that a reverse mortgage has to be done on your personal residence. Okay, you can't do it on a rental property or a bunch of stock or something like that. Secondly, you need to be in the house. If you have to leave the house because you have to go into a nursing home or assisted living,
you get cut off at that point.
That mortgage will be called in typically within a year of leaving the house. Again, these types of charitable trusts are very good vehicles for, again, rental properties, stocks, even cash for that matter. You typically aren't going to put your house into this kind of trust because of the way it works. You're not going to be able to generate any income to pay yourself, from putting your house in. And you won't have a place to live, so that's not a real good situation either.
So we're talking with Jerry Cummings, an estate and gift attorney here in San Jose. There just are a wide range of situations that come up where you really have got to be planning for it. Even if you're in the 20s, 50,000 people a year are dying in car accidents in this country. You need to be ready for it even then.
Yeah, and that's correct. As I tell people, I say at the very least you need to get, as I said earlier, a healthcare power of attorney or advance directive and a financial power of attorney. I've had clients that have had children in their 30s that have had strokes and other issues where they were unable to make decisions, and because their kids did not think to do these types of documents. I mean, they were only 30. Nothing's going to happen to them. We were forced to have to go to court and file, a very expensive conservatorship in order to give the parents the authority to make decisions, for their own, children. And so it is really important that these documents be put in place, as soon as you can.
So we're talking with Jerry Cummings, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds to explore more ways that you can protect your life and those of people that you care for.
I have asthma, and so asthma, like, I can't do that many sports because I like wheeze and then I have to take my inhaler. I can't do a lot of things other kids can do. What I learned at asthma camp is how to treat your asthma and like don't hold back if you have asthma. Breathe California has made it easier for me to play sports and do other things that I couldn't do before.
Welcome back. I'm Terry Trumbull with Breathe California. Every year we help about 100,000 people, as you've seen in some of our public service announcements, with breathing difficulties. Roughly 40% of the population here in the South Bay have asthma or pollution-related disorders, reactions to contaminants, or just plain have their lungs damaged by smoking and air pollution. But much of that can be prevented, and today we're talking with attorney Jerry Cummings here in San Jose about you taking charge of your own life to protect your future. So I often hear the word trust come up, and about the only thing that makes me think of is Rockefeller getting an oil monopoly 150 years ago. What's it got to do with today's subject?
Well, you know, that's actually kind of a common reaction where people think, oh, I don't have enough money to do a trust. And as I said earlier, a living trust is really appropriate for someone that owns any real property in California or any personal assets, brokerage accounts, bank accounts, those types of things of more than $150,000. And what a trust really is, it's a contract. It's a contract between the creator of the trust, known as a settlor or grantor, who contracts with a trustee, who is kind of the manager of the trust, if you will. And the contract is to hold property, your house, and bank accounts, brokerage accounts, for the benefit of a beneficiary. Now, with a living trust, which is what most people do, the creator of the trust, the trustee, and the beneficiary are all the same person. So yeah, it's basically a contract with yourself for the benefit of yourself. And the way that it works is you name in the trust someone that's going to take over in the event that you cannot be the trustee anymore, either because you've died or, again, you've had a stroke or what have you. That would be your spouse often if you're married, or if you're not, it would be your children or a brother, sister. In certain circumstances, you may want a professional trustee, a bank or an individual whose job it is to work as a trustee. And so when they need to take over, they go to the bank and show the bank that you've passed away, or that a doctor has said you're incompetent or can't make decisions. And it's a fairly smooth transition. There's nothing that needs to go through probate. There's nothing that has to go through any type of court proceeding with a trust in most cases. And so we avoid all that time and expense that's otherwise associated with just doing a will, or worse, doing nothing.
Well, and to me, you talked earlier about probate hassles. This is the flip side, because you're really saying that the trust that my attorney set up means if my wife and I both died in a car accident, my daughters get access to the property right away.
Yeah, fairly quickly. I mean, in that situation, they would need to wait until death certificates were issued, but that's within a couple weeks typically. Yeah. And so then they would be able to go to the bank or to your brokerage firm and say, hey, I'm the trustee, here's my parents' death certificates, here's a copy of the trust, we need access to these funds, and they should be able to get that within a few weeks.
So this is a little, I know you know the answers, but it's a little bit different subject matter. It seems to me like the federal estate tax has got to be the most volatile law that we've had in the last, seems like Congress can't get their act together and decide for more than a year on what they're doing. Is that a fair characterization?
That's a very fair characterization. Currently, you can have up to $5 million and die and pass it free of estate taxes. If you're a married couple, that's up to $10 million. Now, that law is set to expire at the end of this year, at which point that $5 million limit will be reduced to $1 million. So for a married couple, a $2 million estate can be passed free of estate taxes. No one knows for sure what's going to happen. Most people think that at some point this year, most likely after the elections, that something will be worked out. If not, after the new Congress and president are sworn in, there'll probably be some type of, may not be a permanent change, but something again that will maybe sunset within 3 or 4 years or something like that.
Well, however it's going, to me, it just emphasizes the need to have somebody that understands what's actually happening. Our estate attorney got us to rewrite our will this year for some things that were made that were changes that were fairly dramatic, and it wouldn't surprise me when you mentioned if they can figure out what to do next year, that it'd be smart to make some more changes.
Yeah, depending on what happens, it definitely would make sense to make changes. No one thinks that it's going to expire, but again, we don't know. We just don't know at this point.
So I want to talk a little bit about Prop 13 and have our audience appreciate a little bit how that works, because with my 2 kids living in our house, likely to inherit the house, it's absolutely wonderful for them on property taxes. Can you kind of explain how Prop 13 works, and if we die, whether the house gets reassessed or not?
Sure. So back in, I believe it was 1977, 78, Proposition 13 was passed, which limited the amount that your property taxes could go up to, I believe, 1 or 2% of the value of the property every year. So for people that owned property at that time, their property taxes are, extremely low compared to the actual value of the property. Sometime, I believe it was in the 80s, Prop 58 was passed, and what that said was that you can pass, if you pass your personal residence from parent to child or from child to parent, it works both ways, that the property taxes will not be reassessed. So, if you had a home that's maybe worth $800,000, but because of Prop 13, maybe your property taxes are only $1,200 a year, and you die, and you give it to your children, they're going to only be paying $1,200 a year in property taxes. It will not get reassessed. Now, it also applies to other property up to $1 million. So if you have a commercial building, rental property, a vacation home someplace, up to $1 million of that value is also exempt from reassessment. Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's probably the only way my kids are going to be able to afford a house. We're kind of worried about them wanting us to die quick, because they both have good jobs with rotten pay. One's a teacher. She graduated from San Jose State and moves in with us because teachers' pay is so poor she can't afford that $800,000 house she mentioned. But the good news is that she's never going to get stuck with the reassessment on the property.
Very, very true. And the other thing people often don't realize is that also applies if you buy a house from your parents. It will not be reassessed. So even if your children bought a house, or a child buys a house from their mom or dad or from both of them, and they pay, let's say again, $800,000, and mom and dad were only paying $1,000 a year in property taxes, that's what that child is going to pay, even though they've now bought the house from their parents for $800,000.
Yeah, and for a daughter who's doing a wonderful job as far as we're concerned, being a teacher, that certainly is a wonderful benefit. On the flip side is it ties her down to being in the same house virtually her whole life. She was born in '77 in the house, but there isn't any way in the world she could afford that level of house without it. So we got about 3 minutes left. What have I forgotten to ask you about? Is there some key concepts that our audience needs to know?
Well, again, I want to kind of, bring things back to the reason that I'm here, which is, because I was asked by Breathe California. And, I'd like people to realize that estate planning is not just for when you die.
Good.
It can also be for when you live, and whether that's because you can't make decisions anymore by doing and having powers of attorney, but it also can be ways that you can benefit yourself by benefiting others. Doing charitable, giving charitable gifts, that's a benefit to yourself. An outright gift to Breathe California results in a tax deduction, and it does a lot of good for Breathe California. And as I mentioned, there's also a lot of estate planning techniques that can be done that benefit both you and would benefit Breathe California. The charitable remainder trust that we talked about, it's a way to increase income, maximize tax deductions, and pass an asset ultimately that's going to do a lot of good.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize this concept. I was, while you were talking, trying to remember anybody that didn't fit this, but every single older person, in other words, a parent, grandparent of somebody that is one of my relatives, had a period where they were incompetent, meaning that they were hospitalized, couldn't manage their own affairs, needed to be conserved. And this required some management of their assets, particularly since none of us really wanted to pay for it, but they're not dead.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important to make sure that all these documents are in place, because the alternative in a situation like that is a conservatorship, and that's very expensive. Conservatorship fees can be $5,000 to $10,000 or more, if people can't agree on who's going to make the decisions.
Yeah, so to just emphasize that, you also mentioned probate fees earlier, and you actually can save by going to an attorney by getting that out of the way. So 30 seconds left. What do you want the audience to remember?
Well, I just would like them to remember that estate planning is really about helping families find peace of mind, and that through estate planning you can not only provide for your children, but you can provide for others as well, such as Breathe California.
So we've been talking with Jerry Cummings, an attorney on Park Avenue here in San Jose. Go and see him for any estate and gift tax problems you have, and next week we'll have another show for you here on Breathe California TV.